Hi, everyone. My name is Philippa Hughes, and I am the director of Curiosity Connects Us, plus Looking for America. It's a project in which we talk to Americans around the country, asking them, what does it mean to be American? And recently, we teamed up with the Friedrich Ebert Foundation to talk to people more on the left. Normally, we have bipartisan conversations, but we thought it'd be interesting for this series of conversations to talk to people who lean left. And we thought we'd talk to people specifically in swing states, especially because the election is coming up and it's a big one. And so want to hear what you all are thinking, and kind of hear from real Americans, not politicians, not voices filtered through media. Like, let's talk to real Americans, whatever that means. Maybe we can talk about what it means to be a real American too. So I've got two awesome women with me today from Minnesota, and I'm just excited to introduce them to you, and also to hear, what's happening in Minnesota, which is turning into kind of a battleground state. So I think it's going to be really important to listen to Minnesotans and hear what they're thinking about. Natalie, let's start with you. Can you tell us a little bit about who you are and your organization? I'm really keen to tell people about the organization you run.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me on today. My name is Natalie Ringsmuth, and I am the executive director of a nonprofit in St. Cloud, Minnesota, which is in the central part of the state. It's called Unite Cloud. You can find us at unitecloud.org. And we are helping people to know, love, and stand up for their neighbors. We have a very different community than we did 20 years ago, mostly because we have a lot of Somali refugees that were resettled into Minnesota and have moved into St. Cloud. And for the first time ever, St. Cloud School District is majority students of color. And so this is just a really large change in who we've been, and it has caused a lot of tension. And so our group, our nonprofit, is speaking into that. I'm the only employee, but then our board is made up of majority women, majority folks of color, mostly folks from all around the world who now call St. Cloud home. So it's a privilege to lead us through these trying times.
Wow, that is interesting. I want to come back to that. Because,
yeah.
People, there's a changing demographic across our country, but you are really experiencing it right now. So that's interesting. I'm excited to have Christine on the call on this conversation. I met her in Venice last year, and I had the most amazing conversation with her and her husband at the time. And I just knew one day, like, I'm going to bring her back in somehow. So I'm excited that this is how we're going to reconnect. So Christine, can you tell us more about yourself?
Well, my name's Christine Ver Ploeg, and speaking of Venice, I'm so grateful we had the chance to be there before the floods, before COVID, before all this. We were very fortunate in that sense. I am a retiree. I'm a lawyer. I started out as a civil rights attorney. Then moved into being a law professor. I'm now retired from academia, but I'm continuing a long career as a labor arbitrator. And so I preside over labor management disputes. We're handling COVID just fine on this end, given the fact that we're retired in pleasant surroundings and comfortably situated. So we realize how fortunate we are. And the family, the kids and the grandkids are healthy. So I would say that I'm certainly blessed, nevertheless, in a high state of agitation over the state of politics and the world today. So
I think we all agree on that.
Yeah.
I had a terrible nightmare last night.
Yeah.
That it was caused by, our current state.
So. Can I add one more thing? In 1991, I helped to found a humanitarian organization that works in Bolivia, which is South America's poorest country. And it started with a few committed people and a really good idea. And if we want any indication of hope, you should take a look at mano and see the enormous things that people can accomplish if you put your mind to it. We're like up to about 180 clinics and dozens and dozens of schools and roads, and and this has been virtually all volunteer, with a few modest exceptions. And so I think that as we throw up our hands in dismay, it's also worth noting that there are people accomplishing amazing things, throughout.
It's wonderful. I would love to look more into that. I have a very good Bolivian friend, and so she keeps telling me, like, you've got to come visit. Like, I'll show you, like my family will show you. Thank you for reminding me to go there.
Yeah.
So I feel like we can't not talk about Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She died last Friday, and I live in Washington, D.C., and I feel very lucky that as soon as I heard she died, like my boyfriend and I walked right down to the Supreme Court and were able to sit there and vigil with hundreds, maybe 1,000 people. It was so amazing, and we went back again, and so after we sort of mourned and got, felt like we got that out of our system a little bit, even though I'm still very sad. Now it's like, it's a fight, like it's on now. What do you think?
Well, what do I think? My first thought was, wow, get out there in the trenches and fight the good fight, and go down in flames if you have to, but never give an inch. The last couple of days, I really find myself in a dilemma, because there appear to be so many people who voted for Trump and who care, but who are now truly despising the man he is. But they're still, first and foremost, all about the Supreme Court, which is to say all about abortion. Abortion kind of fell off the front pages, but it is still driving a huge portion of the electorate. Well, to double back, if there is not a nominee confirmed before the election, and one can imagine a scenario where Trump is dragging his heels to delay it, come the election, there are those who say, I hate the man, but that Supreme Court seat is still in limbo, so I have to vote for him to nail that one down. So in that sense, one might want to see it nailed down. So those would then vote their personal convictions, which would be not Trump, get Biden in. There might be some future openings, or expand the court. So there I find myself in a real muddle.
Yeah, I have, that describes my family. A lot of my family is folks who will vote for Trump again this time, and it will be solely because of the abortion issue. And that's how I was raised, really, that you were Republican because you were Christian, because you don't kill babies. So very black and white, there's no gray area. We're not talking about policies, healthcare, anything like that. We're just talking about babies, and not babies outside of the womb, but babies only inside of the womb. So that's how I was raised, and it's taken me a long time to, it was actually only just recently that I was able to say I'm pro-choice. And I had to figure that out when I was running for my school board seat, because there was an organization in Minnesota that I wanted to get their endorsement, but in order to do that, I had to explain why I was pro-choice. So I had some really amazing friends that sat with me and were my pro-choice friends, and explained how they got there as well and why they were. And so after a lot of thinking and meditating, I realized that that's really where I'm landing now. And so that's hard. That's hard for my family, and it's hard for a lot of people in my faith to understand that. I grew up very conservative Christian. So, but about Ruth Bader Ginsburg, to understand what was happening in 1970 versus now because of what she's done. I was born in 79, and so it really wasn't very long ago, that she made these changes, and to understand that you couldn't be on the mortgage with your husband. Good night. I mean, like, that's crazy talk to me, but that's the reality. And then just like another kind of kick in the teeth, if you will, was understanding that she is the first woman to lie in state in the Capitol.
Yeah.
And it's just like, okay, this is why I'm experiencing so many spaces in central Minnesota where I'm the only woman, and I have to name that as a problem. So much less, I'm not a woman of color, so much less if you're a woman of color in a space, or a person of color in general. But, that just goes to show you that we're not so progressive as a country like we sometimes tend to think we are.
I agree completely. I graduated from law school in 1974. So that gives you some hint that I'm in my 70s. Unlike you, I do not know any Trump supporters, at least not those who confess. And to me, pro-choice has not been a volatile issue that I have had to justify to anybody. So this has, its reappearance has, I guess, kind of surprised me. But I do think back to Minnesota politics, and we were always a progressive state, as was Wisconsin. The upper Midwest was progressive. Iowa, I come from Iowa. When I was growing up, we had the highest literacy rate in the nation. And again, very sound and sensible states. And what has tipped us to red, it has been abortion. That's where, the counter movement rose up, and I guess we're continuing to see it, although it hasn't really been on my radar. It should be, because it's dominating everything. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, when I was growing up, I would, every Sunday, somehow, the pastor would begin or end his sermon talking about how there were certain people that weren't the right type of people, and there were people who had abortions and people who were gay. So, yeah, and this is a pastor who married my husband and I. It was so ingrained in me. I feel like it was beaten into me every Sunday, every Wednesday when I went to Bible school. I mean, I was socialized to believe those things about my neighbors. And it wasn't until I met someone who had an abortion, met someone who was gay in my college years, that again took the time to sit with me and say, and at that point in the 90s, marriage was not a freedom for everyone. And so, my gay friend told me, now, do you not think that my significant other should be with me at my bedside? I'm like, oh, no, I don't believe that, so really I'm 41, but it's taken me a long time to understand what my socialization is, and then really find what are my values.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And fight for them, and be honest with them, because there's a lot at stake for me and my family. There's a lot. We've left churches. We don't go to a church currently in central Minnesota because it's not like us. The values don't match, and that's unfortunate.
And for me, it's been easy. My church has always been, very open and affirming. In fact, we were one of the first congregations years ago to publicly announce we're an open and affirming congregation. Everybody's welcome. And so we have had a lot of gay people join the church because of that stance, which has become much more common in the Twin Cities.
Right.
You're in central Minnesota, and of course, the further north we go, the more rigid it becomes.
Right.
Natalie, could you describe a little bit more about what central Minnesota is like, or could you all talk about the differences, just for our audience to understand what Minnesota, like the lay of the land?
Yeah, our county went 68% for our current president, for President Trump. And so, organizing in this space is much different than, of course, organizing in a place that you know, went majority for Hillary in 2016. And, you know, this is battleground, like you're talking about. And President Trump just visited Bemidji, which is just north of us, this week. And so, you know, and what you saw him say there is what a lot of people in our community say. He spent the first 20 minutes disparaging all Somalis. Every single one of my neighbors who's Somali he disparaged them simply based on their ethnicity and probably as well their religion. And then he went after Ilhan Omar, baseless rumors attacking her. It's just, you can see me probably getting angry just talking about it. But
angry.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's an article that came out that said, that was actually a worldwide article, and a lot of my friends who are Somali, who are organizers in Minnesota, were quoted in it, like Jailani Hussein from CARE Minnesota, and he said, you know, they said, this is a do or die election. Literally, my life is on the line because my family has already not been able to come here because of the Muslim ban. What will happen in the next 4 years if this is what's going on? So what we see in central Minnesota is a parrot of exactly what President Trump says happening here in our community. So we have a lot of public harassment of our Somali neighbors, our neighbors of color, our LGBTQ plus neighbors, something we're dealing with actually here have been dealing with for 5 years at our organization. But, you know, public harassment, it seems to me, it looks to me a lot like when Ruby Bridges was walking into the school for the first time.
Right.
That's what it looks like to be a Muslim woman wearing a hijab walking down the street in St. Cloud. And you'll get, you know, N-word tossed out at you. You'll go back to your country. Same thing with our Hispanic neighbors, you know, and this is not something that a lot of people in central Minnesota are willing to admit. But I think that's the main thing here is that there's continuous microaggressions and even macro to the point of a guy choking a cab driver because he perceived him to be Muslim while he's going down the street at 60 miles an hour. So, you know, there's mostly micro, but also macro as well. That's
well, you know, and I think to summarize Minnesota, I would say urban versus rural, you know, is the great divide. And it happens to be somewhat geographic because most of the rural is north of the Twin Cities. Well, I'd say Duluth even is probably Trump territory. Would you? Yeah.
Yeah, anything, I mean, we mostly organize in north and central Minnesota, and yeah, even the further north you get, it maybe is even worse than St. Cloud.
Well, and we have a cabin in northern Wisconsin, and boy, you see absolutely the same thing there. You've got Milwaukee and Madison as you know, urban right or urban lefties, but you know, in northern rural Wisconsin, it's all Trump signs,
right?
And no masks. No masks.
And no masks. Yeah. Yep.
Who would have thought masks would be a political statement?
Right. I decided since masks are a political statement, I have a mask that says # Black Lives Matter. I'm like, if we're going to go political with this, I may as well just also go full in, right? I have Breonna Taylor one, you know, I mean, let's just be real. I'll go all political. Nobody has said anything to me yet when I wear it though. My kids are like, are you wearing the Black Lives Matter? Yeah, are you wearing the Black Lives Matter one in this grocery station, Mom, or the regular one? I'm like, oh no, the Black Lives Matter one. They're like, awesome, let's go.
Good, yeah. Well,
I have a little confession, and I'm almost like embarrassed to tell you this, but I must because I feel like it relates to this conversation we're having. But a couple weeks ago, my mom forwarded an email to me, an article from CNN, and the title was Vietnamese refugee appointed head of ICE. And my family, my mother's side of the family is Vietnamese, and many came here as refugees. but many of them are very Trumpy and are like, build the wall, don't let any refugees in.
Oh.
It's
Oh.
given me a lot to process all of that, so we can get back to that. But the really embarrassing part is that the new head of ICE is my cousin.
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
Wow.
And I was like, oh my, I can't accept this. Like, this is no bueno here.
Wow.
And so it's been causing like this little family rift because I've been quite vocal and like, this is terrible. How dare he allow his Vietnamese refugee status to be used as cover for really terrible policies.
Uh-huh.
I'm just out of my mind livid about it. And they're like, no, this is so great. Like, we've got to send those bad refugees out. Like, we can't have those people here. All the usual things.
All the usual.
Yeah. And it's like,
well, yeah. No wonder you're also in a state of agitation for many reasons.
I feel extra agitated right now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and what folks would say around here was, well, you didn't speak up about it when Obama did the same things. I'm like, actually, yes, I did.
Actually,
but even if I didn't, for folks that didn't, we didn't hear about it all the time like we hear about it now. And and shame on us for not knowing what was happening then, or for not saying it enough. But these policies are things that have happened continuously. I mean, this isn't something, I think one thing that folks here who are my skin color, who are my religion, who are more liberal, are like, where has this come from? The whole, the rise to power of Trump and what's happening in central Minnesota. And I'm like, this is par for the course for us. Like, where has the Muslim ban come from? Well, we put Japanese neighbors in internment camps in the 40s. So like, this is who we've been from the beginning of our nation. And that is really tough for people to stomach, because I wasn't socialized to believe that growing up. I went to a little bitty Lutheran school, and I was taught that we just had to help Native Americans because they were savage people. And so we had to come in and give them our Christian ways and love them, and it wasn't until later that I'm like, wait a minute, there were over 30 Native Americans hanged in Mankato, the largest mass hanging because of breaking our treaties. Like, the reality of who we are versus the dream of who we are as America is extremely tough for people in my area to stomach.
Well, just a couple of points. All we have to do is look at race relations going back to the beginning of time as, really vivid and inescapable evidence of that. And to which I would simply add, whatever happened to give me you're tired, you're poor, your yearning masses longing to be free. Yeah. You're absolutely right. We see our nation as historically one of values, but we certainly fall down in a big way in many areas, especially now. I mean, at least most people could agree that, equal opportunity, non-discrimination were fundamental values, even if we didn't fully achieve them. And people would be embarrassed to somehow suggest that they were racist, unless they were within their own bubble. But, the overriding ethos of the culture has been one of high values. And that's where Trump has just so eviscerated the norms, making it acceptable to engage in this inflammatory talk that his zealot followers, step up to follow the charge. It's just a real shattering of societal norms. People are so publicly vocal on things they wouldn't have mentioned, would never have conceded openly and viciously before now.
I think it has a lot to do with not, of course, white supremacy, but also Christian supremacy, which is really, really prevalent here. And, one of my girlfriends who is actually the chair of our Unite Cloud board, and she was born and raised in Pakistan. and has been here for a good number of decades. But her daughter came home with a test, and it was on a Shakespeare novel, and it said, well, here's a Shakespeare quote, and who also said something like this in the Bible, in the New Testament? Was it A, B, C, or D? And it was like, and like that would just be total knowledge for anyone in a school district, and she's like, wait a minute, how is this fair to Muslims? And I said, you know what? For sure not, but most kids wouldn't even know that. And she said, well, kids of color. And I said, even white kids. I mean, I think my kids would know it because we raised them in the church. But I mean, it's just that, again, that socialization of this is the norm. Everybody would know that this is a quote by Jesus. No, that's not a normal, this public education. We don't assume that everyone knows about one holy book.
Good point.
That's a really good point. One of the reasons why I brought up this thing about my embarrassing cousin is that I was thinking about how, I have very personal arguments with my family, and we really go at it. And then this took it up to like this whole other level. Like now our family's like involved in this national policy. And so I've been thinking a lot about how people don't think it matters who they vote for, like what's the point? And I don't know, I can't quite make the connection, but this idea that like, actually it really does matter. And here, like for me, it just kind of brought it home about how much it matters. Because somebody in my very own family is now going to be administering policies that I don't like. And that's not obviously going to be true for most people, but it just solidified how personal national politics can actually be. Sometimes I separate that, like I separate my local and state from the national. And actually it all matters. And just to put a fine point on that, I learned this. I didn't even know this, but I after he was appointed, I Googled a lot about, all this stuff. And it turns out that, there's this policy, there's an agreement between the US and Vietnam that says that you cannot deport Vietnamese people who came here before 1995. But the Trump administration has reinterpreted that somehow, and under my cousin's purview, deported 30 Vietnamese people against that agreement.
Really?
Wow. I'm like, are you going to start deporting our family members if somebody shoplifts or something? Like, really? Like, that's how personal it got for me. Anyway.
That's the point, right? Is that this is very personal. So when President Trump says in Bemidji, we're getting Somalis out of here, we put 100 Somalis on the plane to get them back to their own country. And, knowing here that that's someone's cousin, that's someone's dad, that's someone's mom, that is someone's brother. I mean, that is when you don't know someone personally who has been affected by these policies, it can be extremely easy to live in your own bubble and, like many in my family, vote for Trump again. I mean, the saying that I always come back to is that, so if you vote for President Trump, it does not automatically mean you're racist, but it does mean that you are okay with racist policies, and I don't think I know my family doesn't see it that way, that his policies are racist, but they also don't have day-to-day contact like I do with folks who came here as refugees or second and third generation. And so I used to work in a law office as well as a clerk for an immigration attorney. And so to know that the reality is that there are folks who were supposed to be on a plane from Somalia to join their husband the day of the first Muslim ban and still aren't here because of that, like literally turned away at the airport. So children are without their mom, husbands are without their wives, because of a decision by our president. And that's what I try to bring it to here is this is more than just about your 50,000 foot view. This is about your neighbor. And if you are voting against the better interest of your neighbor, then
shame on you.
Yeah.
You know, it's because it's related to this the idea that you thought that abortion was terrible until you actually met somebody, like somebody helped you to see how personal it could be,
Right.
you know, or homosexuals, gays.
Mhm.
Like it became more once it became more personal to you, then you're able to see sort of the more personal issues around it. I don't know, it's just kind of the same thing. I mean, I guess I feel very frustrated because like like the bipartisan conversations that we organize are around immigration issues.
Mm.
And so we make sure that there are many immigrants, recent immigrants at the dinners having involved in the conversations. And it is about making sure that you have personal contact, because science, social science tells us when you have a personal interaction with somebody who's different from you,
Right.
it builds more empathy with that. You build more empathy. But we're all living in our little silos, our little bubbles. Like, how are we going to break through and make those connections happen? I mean, it's a real problem because
Yeah.
we, as human, it's human nature to want to be around people like yourself. Like, that's something we have to really grapple with.
Right. I know I hide a lot of people on Facebook. In fact, I just went through, I had like 3,000 friends on Facebook and it was overwhelming me. And so I got it down to like 560.
Oh,
I mean,
wow.
Wow, that's a lot.
Urged.
I would have
That's
never
still a lot of
imagined,
friends.
it's a lot, but I know each one. And if they're, you know, I had my family members I still I'm friends with on Facebook, but I hide a lot of their statuses because I'm not going to change their mind. When I'm with them in person, if they say something, I will definitely speak up. But, you know, to have a conversation on Facebook doesn't really work.
It doesn't work, but you know, I have purposely tried to cultivate Facebook friends who are different from me. I don't know them, but I do want to see like what's happening, what people are saying, because otherwise I start getting into my own little world, a bubble that I can't even, I can't see anything differently unless
Right.
somebody tells me.
Yeah, that's really important. I purposely listened to the very right leaning radio this morning on the way here, kind of in preparation for this conversation, and they said rioters either need to. So this is of course because of George Floyd, and then of course because of Breonna Taylor, the Breonna Taylor decision last night. This talk show host said we either need to um, say that rioters are, let me make sure I'm quoting him right, say that rioters are terrorists and put them in Guantanamo Bay for the rest of their lives, or whenever there's a riot, we need to call in the National Guard right away. So these are the two options that he's choosing from, and then people are calling in and being like, for sure, National Guard all the way. And so I'm thinking, you know, like, what does that even mean for our nation if that's where we go?
Right.
Well, and as a bit of a related point, I can't believe the number of politicians who are somehow linked to QAnon. Absurd. And you know, and Trump won't disavow them because he'll take any supporter where he can get them. And but can you believe that this nation has a visible group, QAnon, believing, you know, that the world is being taken over by a satanic cult of pedophiles who are out to bring down Trump? Unbelievable.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
What insanity is taken over?
and I mean, I totally am with you. And I also know that I believe, you know, based on just some social science research that I've seen, is that most Americans, you know, the vast majority of Americans do not believe that kind of stuff. The vast majority of Americans actually want to talk to each other and are sick and tired of polarization. And there's this one study that's called the Hidden Tribes, and they call those of us who are trying to combat polarization and are exhausted by it, the exhausted majority. So I'm calling myself that.
True that.
But unfortunately, even though the QAnon crowd is actually quite small, like really small, or the
Really small
ends are very small, but they're the loudest, and they have means to amplification. Like the Reddits, the social medias, like they're so loud. They can be louder than they really, than their science would tell us. And that's such a problem. And that's, I've been thinking about the polarization industrial complex. Like there's profit to be made in keeping us polarized. And we can see that happening with these loud voices that are drowning out us exhausted majority.
We have that here with the Islamophobia industrial complex. So that's one of our main things that we worked on at the beginning of Unite Cloud, is calling out when a national or even international speaker, or local for that matter, would come in and just preach outright lies, literally usually in a church. Anti-Islam, anti-refugee. There are folks that make a ton of money doing this all over the nation. And so before I was well known in this area, I would go to those meetings and I would take notes, and then I would write a blog. And that was really, the fear in the room is so palatable. And reading articles about why is it majority Christians that are willing to accept QAnon, or willing to see the truth, like the truth of what our president is doing and saying, and then just to say, no, that's made up. I don't believe that. People in my family, I just had a conversation with someone this weekend, and I said, what about this truth that he said this about veterans? No, I don't believe that. Someone's making that up. That's his actual words. And so just the cognitive dissonance that has to happen in order for this to continue in our nation is very high. And I wish that I could say that we rid this area of the Islamophobia industrial context, but what we did is actually make it go even further underground. And so yes, we don't know where they're meeting anymore. There's only one church that'll still host them in this community, but we've pushed them out of St. Cloud and into more rural areas. And so, like, did we succeed? Because now we've pushed them into the areas where nobody there knows a refugee. Nobody there knows a person who's Somali. Nobody there knows someone who's Muslim or a person of color in general. So is that success? I don't know.
Well, I would say it is success in that you have reverted to a sane baseline for values. There is recognition that this kind of talk reflects poorly on them,
right,
unless they're within their own tribe. Yeah. So they're no longer visible. They're no longer public. They see the need to be more secretive. So in that sense, I would say that's pushing back the tide.
Yeah,
that's a good point. I was in this other little talk with a pollster who works at the Cato Institute in my efforts to hear all the sides. And she did a poll recently in which she found that 62% of Americans are afraid to express their views because they fear losing their job or social status or whatever. And she was trying to spin that as saying this is a bad thing because people shouldn't be afraid to express their views. And part of me understands that because we should talk about them, we should be able to express them. But then part of me is like, some views should be suppressed. Like, we should not have to listen to certain things. Like, they're wrong. So anyway, it was like a kind of interesting little interplay about how to interpret that data. And she also found that of all the sort of groupings along the political spectrum, the only group that feels like it's okay to fully express their viewpoints are the far left.
Because we stand for some universal values, and we stand for religious values. If you really look into the Bible, the Bible is not anti-gay, anti-Arab, anti-anything. Love thy neighbor. And so we just need to keep returning to emphasizing, what are we proud of? What are we ashamed of to say or to do? And maybe it feels good to scream epithets at, you know, a Muslim neighbor on the street, but would you really wanted that posted and broadcast? That kind of ugliness.
Yeah, we've had that happen here where there was just recently a paraprofessional at a local school district who, oh man, said some horrible things about people of color on her social media, and then said, "Well, oh no, I was hacked."
Yeah, it's fake.
Weren't any, but you know, like that's exactly what you're talking about. Like she knows that she can't work in a school district and be with kids and then say we have to get our guns out and kill protesters. Like we, you know, that those two things can't coincide. And I love what you said, Christine, about what are we proud of, and what was the other thing? What are we proud of, and what
Ashamed
are we
of?
Yeah.
Or
so
certainly would not want widely known that this is who we are. I think often of that classic photograph, I believe it was Ruby, going to school, young black gal, going to high school, surrounded by the National Guard, and a shrieking mob of white Southerners. And there's one woman in particular with just the most contorted, hateful, shrieking face.
Mm-hmm.
And that woman has lived with that image all these years and been ashamed of it. And there have been some articles about how Ruby and she have reconciled, become friends, very supportive of each other. But that woman has to live with that image as, you know, one of the iconic photographs of the civil rights movement. And she is the face of hate. She was the face of hate.
But she was hateful.
She was hateful.
She did live with that.
And she was surrounded by her tribe, looking and acting the same way. Yeah. So it is this groundswell of manic behavior. And these are probably, I don't know, Southern Baptists who've been in church religiously, you know, and it's all about God and the Bible. And, but there they are.
That point you make about being surrounded by your tribe, I mean, people are emboldened by being around the tribe. Like that's why Trump rallies are so popular. Like you get to be around your tribe, and it's exciting. I've heard people talk about like it's exciting. It's fun. Like a friend of mine wrote a book called Liar's Circus. He went to a bunch of Trump rallies and wrote about it, and he just describes like it's just the energy starts building and building because they're feeding off of each other.
Well, and of course those certainly sound like Hitler rallies. That was the huge rising up, and you lost all sense of you know, balance. And swept up in the
individuality. Yeah, like what would you actually think? You know, forget about all these other people, these voices.
I think it can be the same on. I don't think it. Well, this might not be a popular view, but it can be similar on the left.
Oh,
I mean,
absolutely. That is a very popular view in this crowd, I think.
Yeah, I spend, you know, how many years of, this will probably be the first election I only vote on the Democratic ticket, no lie. Because some local races I have kept within the Republican realm. And you know, that's interesting going from an 18-year-old voting all Republican to finally I'm 41 and now, you know, I'm all Democrat. But I was on a call about Minnesotans for Biden call yesterday, and it was for local elects because I'm part of the school board. And you know, we have to be really careful on the school board because we're nonpartisan, and I'm not up for election this time, and so I don't want. Everybody knows where I stand in this community, but at the same time, I shouldn't, in my opinion, sign on a letter that's like, Natalie is for Biden. Well, everybody knows that. So I might as well not put myself out there and then put like school board member. That's not the reality of what I can do here or should do, in my opinion. But there was a lot of pushback last night from folks who that are going to sign the letter and everybody who pushed back was from your neck of the woods, Christine. So very liberal areas. You know, if you didn't sign.
Exactly. That because they're pushing back on you not signing?
They're pushing back on me not signing. And then one guy said, if you won't sign now, when will you sign? And I'm like, no, honey, you know what, I'm on this call. I'm doing the best I can with boots on the ground work here to elect Biden in this community against all odds, you know, but we have to allow for it to look different in different communities. You know, that I may be more one-on-one talk versus because of who this community is, or small group. Whereas in the cities, or, you know, in a place like Atlanta or Los Angeles, you could have the biggest Biden rally, you know, where here in this part of Minnesota, we have the biggest Trump rally, you know, so we have to allow for the differences in organizing. And that, I think, has been the downfall of more left-leaning folks, is that we haven't figured out what the right way is to organize in smaller communities and smaller towns, because there's a lot at stake. You know, my family's been kicked out of churches because of our beliefs, and so there's a lot at stake personally for folks to stand up here.
Oh, wow. Well, you're right. This business of Democrats and purity tests is insane. And, you know, certainly Biden was not my top choice, but,
Same.
you know, thank God he is our candidate. They can't get a lot of mileage out of him, although certainly they're getting a lot of mileage out of Portland and, you know, now Louisville. But yeah,
Go ahead, Christine.
if only these were calmer times. If only
Less
a cop had not killed George Floyd. If only Ruth Bader Ginsburg had not just died. If only we could have taken those issues off the table for a while. But it's all come in, and it's just been, you know, fuel for the fire. And we have
and yet we can't take those issues off the table because people live them daily. Right? I mean, we are women every day of our lives. And so, you know, whether I can make decisions about my own body or not is on the line at this point. And whether, you know, my friends who are people of color can have the same educational opportunities, the same opportunities for income that I do, is on the line 100%. And, you know, I think we're coming to grips in Minnesota and the North with the fact of, we can't just say anymore, well, that was the South, they own slaves.
Right.
We haven't reconciled ourselves. And there's a great book out by Dr. Chris Lehman that's called Slavery's Reach, How Slavery Impacted the North Star State. It's about slavery in Minnesota. Not that you could have slaves in Minnesota, but that a lot of our institutions were funded by slave owners. And coming here for the summer, or, you know, giving money to their relatives or their friends. And so, you know, like we have got to reconcile as Northerners that we were just as complicit in what was happening in our country then. And we even more so haven't had to have these discussions because we aren't the South. So we're behind. You know, I mean, Atlanta, when I lived there for 10 years, the integration there, you know, I went to church where there were folks of all races. And here, there is not one church that is anything but, and this is in St. Cloud, it's either an all-white church with maybe one or two people of color, or there are now all Black churches.
As a former civil rights attorney myself, I couldn't agree with you more. And taking issues off the table is probably the wrong phrase. But what alarms me is that these issues have now become the driving visible issues. The protest movement, and now, you know, abortion is front center. When for the election, I would so much prefer the election issue would be, how has Trump performed the last 4 years? Can you take any more of this? But no, I agree with you completely.
And how is healthcare not the number one thing? We're in a freaking pandemic. Like, how are we not talking
about the pandemic? Pandemic who?
I know, right? Well, people here in central Minnesota have decided, I think we're over this. You know, Not as many people. We were wearing masks like hardcore as soon as Governor Walz made the statewide mandate. But ever since the kids have gone back to school, you know,
No more.
I see a lot of the times folks not wearing masks in public.
Really?
Yeah.
And here we've hit 200,000 deaths.
Right.
With
right.
a whole lot more forecast. We haven't even started cold and flu season.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't started our second wave. I mean, that's coming. So.
Right.
But someone very close to me who I really love and trust said to me, you know, President Trump's done a great job with the pandemic because he closed the borders. And that's what he says, right? So there's the parroting of what he says. And then like, well, and what has Biden done? Well, he's not the president. You know?
It's like saying, what have I done?
Right. What
can I do?
Yeah.
Oh.
I love talking to you too. This is so fun.
Well, it's been fun for me too. Yeah. Natalie, I'm so glad to connect with you and to know you're my neighbor and what you're doing in St. Cloud.
Yeah, I would love to send you a Love Your Neighbor sign. So those are what our signs are. Speaking of that.
I'd love.
Yeah, well, it has a Minnesota on it, but you go, girl.
For sure, I'd love it.
They look kind of like this.
That's very nice.
This one with a heart, and then it says, so it's love, and then it says your neighbor. It's a yard sign. So I'll send you one of these, Philippa, because since you probably won't put Minnesota in your yard, but yeah.
Oh, no, that sounds wonderful.
Wonderful.
Yeah. I'm at, I can tell you my address, 12.
Yeah, send it to me.
No, not on the recording.
All right.
I live at, yeah.
All right, yeah, we were on email. Perfect.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
I want to be respectful of your time. I am just so thrilled to be connected to both of you. This has been an amazing conversation, and I'm excited to share it with our friends across the Atlantic, because I think they need to hear us saying that we are upholding our values. And I think a lot of times people outside of the US are hearing, all they hear about is Trump and all these awful people. They're not hearing from people like us who are, as Natalie, you are fighting the fight, the good fight.
Right.
So I want to amplify your work, because we need to show people we are out there fighting against all odds at this point.
That's right.
It feels like. So, thank you, Natalie, for your work, and thank you, Christine, so much. Like, you're a hero, so thank you.
Well, and thank you for this opportunity, and we look forward to what you put together, and I would look forward to staying in touch with each other as well.
Yeah, for sure. I'm going to meet y'all in Venice when this pandemic is over.
Hey,
sure. We should plan that. Seriously.
Okay.
Thank you.
We'll sign off now. Thanks very much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.